The invitation arrived in a stiff, ivory-colored envelope, its weight and texture speaking of expense before a single word was read. It felt more like a summons than an invitation. My fingers traced the embossed lettering, the address printed in a deep, regal black. There was no return address needed. The sheer opulence of the stationery was its own identifier. I slid my thumb under the flap, the expensive paper tearing with a crisp, final sound. Inside, on a slab of cardstock thick enough to stand on its own, was a professionally shot photograph of my 1-year-old nephew. He was perched on a velvet cushion, his face a perfect picture of infantile delight. A shock of blonde hair swept to one side. He wasn't just wearing a cute outfit, he was encased in a miniature, tailor-made tuxedo, complete with a tiny satin bow tie and patent leather shoes that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. The text, swirled in actual gold foil, declared, "Celebrate the first year of our little prince. Join us for a black tie gala in his honor." My breath hitched. The venue was the Grand Celestia, one of the city's most exclusive event spaces. The dress code was black tie optional. The guest list, I would later learn, topped 250 people. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, the invitation feeling like a lead weight in my hand. The laminate surface of the table, chipped at one corner, seemed to mock the gloss of the card. A memory, sharp and painful, pierced through me. My own son's first birthday. I had spent weeks planning it. I'd strung colorful paper lanterns, I'd folded myself between the trees in our modest backyard. I'd baked a cake, a lopsided chocolate mess I'd decorated with blue frosting and clumsy stars. I'd invited a handful of our friends, other moms from the playground, a few kind neighbors. My family had come, a duty call. My mother had spent most of the time scrolling through her phone, sighing about the weak Wi-Fi. My father had patted my son on the head, given him a generic rattle, and left after 45 minutes for a can't-miss tea time. My brother and his wife had arrived late, bearing a gift bag from a department store. Inside was a white onesie, size 3 to 6 months, my son was already in 12-month clothing. The clearance tag still attached. They had stayed for 20 minutes. "Mommy, look," my son's voice, now 4 years old, pulled me from the bitter recollection. He stood beside me, a stubby finger, smeared with the vibrant green of a crayon, pointing at his cousin's photograph. "A party? For baby? Can I go? Can I wear my dinosaur shirt? The one with the spikes?" His eyes were wide with the uncomplicated excitement only a child can muster. The dinosaur shirt was his favorite. A faded red thing from a thrift store with a screen-printed T-Rex whose roar was more of a friendly smile. The contrast between his simple joy and the cold, calculated glamour of the invitation was a physical pain in my chest. A fissure opened in my heart, not just of hurt, but of a profound, protective fury. "Of course we can go, my love," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I pulled him onto my lap, inhaling his scent of crayons and baby shampoo. "And we will find you the most wonderful shirt to wear. A shirt fit for a prince." The day of the party was a study in surreal excess. A valet in a pristine uniform looked momentarily confused as I handed him the keys to our 8-year-old sedan, its interior littered with cracker crumbs and a lone, forgotten action figure. He parked it between a gleaming obsidian black Range Rover and a low-slung, silver sports car that cost more than our house. The walk to the entrance of the Grand Celestia felt like crossing a border into a different nation, one whose currency was ostentation. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of expensive perfume and hundreds of real, white roses. The scale of it was breathtaking. The main hall was a whirl of white and gold. A literal, live miniature pony, its mane braided with silk ribbons, stood patiently in a flower-bedecked enclosure. A photographer capturing toddlers perched nervously on its back. Nearby, a man in a chef's hat was meticulously carving a swan from a block of clear ice, the shavings scattering like diamonds on the floor. A 5-tiered cake, a detailed replica of a storybook castle with turrets and sugar paste flags, dominated an entire wall. The food stations weren't just buffets, they were culinary theaters. A sushi chef wielding a blade with lethal grace. An Italian nonna figure hand-rolling fresh pasta. A chocolate fountain cascading into a pool of swirling, dark velvet. My son, squeezed into a stiff, new button-down shirt and tiny khakis, buried his face in my leg, his small hand clutching the fabric of my simple dress. We were early, and the immediate family was holding court near a grotesquely ornate throne-like high chair, upholstered in gold velvet. "Ah, you made it," my mother said, turning toward us. She was resplendent in a gown of emerald silk, her silver hair coiffed into an immobile helmet. She leaned in for an air kiss, her diamond earrings grazing my cheek, her eyes already scanning the room over my shoulder, checking the arrivals of more important guests. "I was worried you'd get lost." "GPS is a marvel," I replied, my smile a tight, practiced muscle memory. My brother and his wife descended upon us, their faces glowing with a proprietary pride. She was a vision in champagne-colored lace, he in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. "Isn't this just perfect?" my sister-in-law gushed, her hand resting on the gilded high chair as if it were a holy relic. We wanted his first birthday to be a core memory. Something he can look back on and know how cherished he is. "It's certainly memorable," I managed, the word tasting like ash. My father, beaming, clapped my brother on the back. "Only the best for my grandson. Look at him. You can see the intelligence in his eyes. A future leader. This is just the beginning." Just then, my son, gathering a shred of 4-year-old courage, let go of my leg and toddled a few steps toward a display of giant plush animals from a high-end European toy brand. He reached out a tentative, wondering hand to touch the soft nose of a giraffe that was nearly as tall as he was. "Don't touch that," my brother's voice cracked through the air, sharp and startling. He didn't shout at his own son, but the command was absolute. "Those are for the professional photos only. They have to stay pristine for the shoot." My son flinched as if struck. His hand snapped back to his chest, and his lower lip began to tremble. He scurried back to me, his small body trembling, and buried his hot, tear-streaked face deep into my hip. The message was delivered with crystal clarity. In this gilded world, he was an interloper. He was not a participant, but a spectator who must not smudge the scenery. I knelt down, my vision blurring with a rage so potent it was dizzying. I wrapped my arms around him, creating a small, safe fortress against the glittering coldness. "It's okay, my brave boy," I whispered into his hair, my voice shaking. "It's okay. That giraffe isn't as friendly as the one in your book. He's just for looking at, not for loving." The rest of the party was a hazy, painful montage. A live harpist played ethereal music that was drowned out by the roar of conversation. A famous children's entertainer, flown in first class from Los Angeles, performed a set that had the adults laughing more than the children. The climax was the cake smashing. The entire room, including a crew from a local society news program, gathered around as my nephew was encouraged to destroy a perfectly sculpted miniature version of the castle cake. Flash bulbs popped, the crowd cooed on cue, and my brother made a speech about legacy and nurturing potential. We sat at a table near the kitchen doors, my son and I. An island of quiet misery in a sea of roaring celebration. He pushed the seared scallop and microgreen salad around his plate with a fork. Utterly bewildered, he leaned his head against my arm. "I want to go home, Mommy," he whispered, his voice small and broken. "I don't like this party. The people are loud, and the giraffe is mean." As I drove away from the blinding facade of the Grand Celestia, my son asleep in his car seat, exhausted and emotionally bruised, the last fragile thread of hope for my family's redemption finally snapped. They had not just favored one child. They had erected a temple to him and made mine feel unworthy of even crossing its threshold. They had chosen their prince. And in that moment, gazing at my son's peaceful, sleeping face in the rearview mirror, I made a silent, ironclad vow. I would ensure that my son would become a king in a realm so magnificent, so unassailable, that their gilded cage would look like what it was, cheap and empty. The little prince's first birthday was not a standalone event. It was the glittering capstone on a foundation of neglect that had been carefully, if unconsciously, laid since the day my son was born. In the quiet, lonely weeks that followed the party, the memories, once isolated stings, began to connect, forming a damning and deliberate-looking pattern. The beginning had been in the hospital. The labor was long and difficult. When my son was finally placed in my arms, a tiny, squalling, perfect miracle, I was exhausted and elated. My parents visited once. They stood at the foot of the bed, maintaining a safe distance as if from something contagious. My father had leaned in, gave the baby an awkward pat on the head, and said, "Well, he's got all his fingers and toes. That's the main thing." My mother had offered a vague, "He's lovely, dear," but her attention was fractured. When her phone buzzed with a special ringtone, her face lit up. "It's about the ultrasound," she'd exclaimed, turning away from me to take the call, her voice dripping with excitement. "Oh, a boy, a little prince. We're so thrilled." They left 10 minutes later, citing the infamous traffic. The room, which had felt so full of promise, felt cavernous and empty in their wake. When my nephew was born, my mother had sent me a flurry of texted photos. The hospital room was a jungle of exotic flower arrangements and metallic, "It's a boy" balloons. My father was in one picture, beaming, holding a box of expensive cigars. They had camped out there for hours. The Christmases were annual exercises in emotional arithmetic. Under their professionally decorated tree, the pile of gifts for my nephew was a sprawling metropolis. There were miniature designer sweaters, wooden toys from Denmark that were more art than playthings, a tiny battery-powered Mercedes for him to drive, and envelopes that I knew contained bonds for his future. For my son, there was always a single, lonely box. One year, it was a cheap, plastic robot that fell apart before New Year's Eve. Another year, it was a coloring book with half the pages already colored in. The gifts were so transparently afterthoughts, procured on a last-minute guilt trip to a discount store, that they were more insulting than receiving nothing at all. The Christmas when my son was 3 etched itself into my soul with the clarity of a brand. He had spent weeks carefully drawing a picture for each of his grandparents, a chaotic beautiful scribble of green and red that he told me was Santa's sleigh in a storm. He presented it to my mother with a beaming, expectant face. She took it, said, "How nice, sweetie," and placed it on a side table, where it was immediately buried under a pile of my nephew's new, expensive wrapping paper. Later, my son, clutching his broken robot, had looked up at her with wide, confused eyes and asked, "Grandma, didn't Santa like my list?" She had patted his head, her gaze fixed on my nephew, who was gleefully ripping the paper off a toy so large it needed its own assembly instructions. "Oh, I'm sure he was just very busy, sweetie. Look at what your cousin got. A real car. Isn't that amazing?" My son had looked from the shiny red pedal car to the cracked plastic limb in his own hand, and his little shoulders had slumped in a gesture of defeat that no child should ever know. I had rushed him to the bathroom, holding him as silent sobs racked his small body, my own tears falling into his hair, my rage a silent scream. The justifications were a constant, corrosive litany. "Your brother needs the support," my mother would explain in a hushed tone when I dared to point out the imbalance. "His wife chooses not to work, and they're establishing themselves in the right social circles. The private schools, the country club, it's a different world. You're so strong. You've always been so fiercely independent. You don't need us propping you up. You made your choices," my father would add, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "You chose to have a child on a single income. That comes with sacrifices. Your brother planned his family. He's building a legacy, a dynasty." The word dynasty would hang in the air, suffocating. They spoke of my nephew as if he were a nascent Rockefeller, while my son was a pleasant but ultimately inconsequential branch on the family tree. The emotional toll on my son was the most devastating thing to witness. He was a perceptive and sensitive child, and he internalized the message of his own unimportance long before he had the words for it. He stopped drawing pictures for his grandparents because he noticed they never made it to the refrigerator, which was a gallery dedicated solely to his cousin's school photos and soccer team portraits. He stopped asking them to come to his kindergarten, author's teas, or his school plays because the answer was always a variation of "we have a conflict that was invariably a golf tournament or a ballet recital for my nephew. The breaking point came one afternoon when he was 6. He came home from school, his backpack dragging on the ground, his usual bright eyes dim. He didn't run to me for a hug. "Mommy," he asked, his voice small and serious, "what's a charity case?" The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "Where did you hear that word, baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Grandpa was on the phone in his office. The door was open a little. He said that cousin was a shining star, and that I was a charity case that you took on. I pulled him into a fierce, crushing hug, my vision turning red with a fury so absolute it was terrifying. In that moment, any lingering hope for a reconciliation or a change of heart died. My mission was no longer to seek their approval or even their acknowledgement. It was to build a fortress of unconditional love, unwavering belief, and unshakable self-worth around my son, so powerful that their rejection would one day feel like a minor footnote in the epic story of his life, a story of which they were not worthy. I went back to school that semester. I took my modest skills in graphic design and poured myself into night classes for digital marketing, branding, and business management. My life became a grueling cycle of work, classes, motherhood, and sleepless nights. I existed on caffeine and a cold, burning determination. I started my own freelance digital marketing agency from my kitchen table, taking on any client I could find, building my reputation one project at a time. Our life was simple, even austere, but it was rich in the ways that truly mattered. In laughter, in shared stories, in the quiet comfort of knowing we were a team. Every dollar I saved wasn't for a designer handbag or a country club membership. It was for his future, for his education, for his first car, for a life where he would never ever have to feel like a second-class citizen in his own family. The years unfolded, each one adding another layer of insulation between our small, purposeful world and the glittering, hollow spectacle of my brother's family. The extravagant parties for my nephew became a predictable, almost laughable ritual. There was the superhero soirée for his 5th birthday, where custom-made capes were given as favors. The Winter Wonderland 7th birthday, held in a massive, air-conditioned tent in the middle of July, complete with fake snow and a sledding hill. The pièce de résistance was his 10th birthday. A week-long educational trip to Disney World for 15 of his closest friends. All expenses paid, framed as a cultural immersion. My family's obsession with him only deepened. Their conversations a monotonous litany of his every minor accomplishment, each one framed as a sign of his inevitable world-changing genius. He scored a goal in soccer, was delivered with the gravity of a World Cup victory. He got a B+ on his science project, was discussed as if he'd just unlocked cold fusion. My son, now a quiet, observant preteen, had become a phantom at these mandatory family functions. He was polite, well-mannered, but emotionally absent. He had long ago constructed his own rich, internal world, one they had no access to and no interest in exploring. He would often bring a book, finding a quiet corner to read while the celebration raged around him. What they didn't know was that the world he was building was not one of escape, but of creation, and it was extraordinary. It had begun on his 10th birthday. I had scrimped and saved to buy him a premium, beginner's coding kit. It wasn't flashy, but when he unwrapped it, his eyes didn't just light up. They ignited with a focused, intense fire I had never seen before. While other kids were outside playing, he was hunched over our old computer, his small fingers flying across the keyboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't just play games, he dissected them. He moved from simple, block-based programming to Python, then to C++, with a speed that was almost unnerving. He had a mind that saw the elegant, logical skeleton beneath the skin of any system. He started building his own simple games for fun. Then, he found his niche. He began creating beautifully designed, puzzle-based apps that taught complex scientific and mathematical concepts in a way that was intuitive, engaging, and secretly educational. His first real project, which he called Quantum Leap, was a game where the player guided a charming, quizzical character through a whimsical universe, with the game mechanics illustrating the mind-bending principles of quantum superposition. He uploaded it to a major developer platform under a pseudonym, not expecting anything. It went quietly viral in homeschooling and gifted student circles. It was downloaded first by the hundreds, then the thousands, then the tens of thousands. A prominent tech blog focused on educational tools discovered it and wrote a glowing feature, praising its breathtakingly ingenious design, and its ability to make the profoundly complex feel like child's play. He was 11 years old. He didn't stop. He worked with a quiet, relentless passion, building a small but impressive portfolio of apps. Euler's Bridge, a game that turned graph theory and network optimization into a beautiful puzzle about connecting floating islands. Pythagoras's Playground, which made geometric principles a tangible, interactive experience. By the time he was 13, the passive income from in-app purchases and targeted advertising was substantial, a 5-figure sum that he, with my help, diligently invested in a conservative portfolio. He wasn't just a coding prodigy, he was a stealth CEO, running a successful tech startup from his unassuming bedroom. We made a pact to keep it all a secret from my family. Their world of loud, performative wealth felt increasingly vulgar and meaningless next to the quiet, potent empire my son was building with nothing but his intellect and determination. My own business had flourished in parallel. The years of relentless hustle had paid off. My one-woman freelance operation had grown into a respected small agency with a roster of loyal clients and a reputation for delivering exceptional results. We had moved from our cramped apartment into a beautiful, light-filled modern house in a good school district, which we had bought outright, mortgage-free. We lived well but with a purposeful modesty. Our wealth was not for display, it was our armor, our freedom, our secret. The final catalyst was my nephew's 13th birthday invitation. It was for a super sweet 13. And the venue was a privately rented amusement park for the entire evening. The cost, my mother whispered to me breathlessly on the phone, was a king's ransom. But worth every penny for such a milestone. It's going to be the social event of the season, she trilled. We've hired a famous DJ, there are custom-made leather-bound journals as party favors for every guest, and we're projecting a professionally produced 20-minute montage of his life on a giant, outdoor screen. You simply must be there. And make sure your son comes. It's so important for the cousins to bond at this age. The hypocrisy was so vast it was almost impressive. For 13 years they had done less than nothing to foster a relationship between the boys. They had actively created a hierarchy. Now, my son was expected to serve as a supporting character, a prop in the ongoing narrative of his cousin's fabulous life. It will depend on his schedule, I said, my voice cool and level. He's very busy with his own projects these days. Projects? She let out a light, tinkling laugh, the sound like shattering glass. That's adorable. Building more of those little computer games? Well, tell him this will be much more fun. There will be roller coasters. He can take a break from his little hobby. I ended the call and placed the phone gently on the counter. I looked out the window of our beautiful, quiet home. At the garden my son and I had planted together. A slow, cold, and utterly certain smile spread across my face. The season of silence was over. The rented amusement park was a surreal spectacle of forced merriment and staggering waste. Under the setting sun, the screams from the roller coasters sounded more panic than joyful. My nephew, now a teenager with a carefully cultivated air of bored entitlement, held court near the bumper cars, surrounded by a pack of sycophantic friends who seemed more interested in the unlimited access to the park's attractions than in him. My son and I arrived, dressed in tasteful, understated clothes that spoke of quality without screaming for attention. We were met with the usual, practiced indifference. "Oh, good, you're here," my brother said, his gaze sweeping over us and then moving on. "The food is over by the Ferris wheel. The prime rib is excellent. Help yourselves." My mother fluttered over, adjusting my son's collar with a critical eye. My, you're getting so tall. You should try to mingle. Your cousin knows all the best people from his private school. Such interesting, accomplished families. My son simply offered a small, polite smile, a deep, unshakable confidence in his calm eyes that they were too self-absorbed to perceive. The main event was the speech and the video montage. The entire gathering was herded into a vast, open-air pavilion with a screen the size of a small house. My brother took the microphone, his voice booming with paternal pride. Friends, family, thank you for coming to celebrate our son, the light of our lives, he began, his voice echoing through the speakers. As he stands on the precipice of his teenage years, we look with awe at the incredible young man he is becoming. A natural athlete, a born leader among his peers. And we have no doubt that he is destined for true greatness. The montage began, a slick, professionally edited sequence of baby photos, slow-motion soccer goals, and glamorous family vacations set to an overwrought orchestral pop song. The crowd of 250 people clapped at all the right moments. A well-rehearsed audience. As the video faded to black and the credits rolled, my father, emboldened by several glasses of top-shelf whiskey, grabbed the microphone for an impromptu toast. To my grandson, he slurred, raising his glass high. The future of this family. A leader of men. Not like some kids these days, hiding away in their bedrooms all day, glued to their computer screens. That's not how you build a real future. He didn't glance in our direction, but the target of his contempt was as clear as if he'd pointed. A few uncomfortable, knowing titters rippled through the section of the crowd that contained our extended family. That was our cue. The final, unforgivable line had been crossed. I turned to my son and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't smile. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. His fingers, so adept at speaking the language of machines, danced across the screen. He had reverse-engineered the Park's AV system days ago, just in case. With 3 swift taps, he hijacked the Bluetooth connection to the massive sound and video system. The giant screen, which had just gone dark, flickered back to life with a soft hum. But instead of the family photos, it displayed the sleek, minimalist, and instantly recognizable logo of my son's software company, Lumina Labs. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the crowd. Then, a trailer began to play. It wasn't a home movie. It was a piece of high-concept marketing genius. The visuals were stunning, cinematic. It showcased his latest and most ambitious project, Ether, a revolutionary AI-driven educational platform that created deeply personalized learning journeys, adapting in real time to a student's strengths and weaknesses. The narration was smooth, the graphics breathtaking, the potential earth-shattering. The trailer ended with a simple, powerful title card, Ether. Coming this fall. From the award-winning young developer behind Quantum Leap and Euler's Bridge. A profound silence fell over the pavilion, broken only by the distant clatter of a roller coaster. Then, a man stood up from a table near the front. He was a well-known tech journalist, a guest of one of my brother's business associates who had been trying to woo him for a profile. "Wait a minute," the journalist said, his voice cutting through the quiet, sharp with excitement. Is that the Quantum Leap? The educational app? My kids are absolutely obsessed with it. It's genius. You're telling me the developer is here?" He was staring, not at my brother or my father, but directly at my son, who was still holding his phone. All 250 pairs of eyes swiveled to him. My son, with a poise that stopped my breath, stood up. He didn't need a microphone. The silence was so complete, his clear, calm voice carried to the very back. "Thank you," he said, a faint, confident smile on his lips. "Yes, I created Quantum Leap, Euler's Bridge, and the other apps under the pseudonym. I've been developing educational software for the past 3 years. The Ether platform launches in 3 months." The pavilion erupted, not in applause but in a wave of astonished chatter. My family was frozen in place, a tableau of utter, gobsmacked disbelief. My brother's face was a mask of stunned incomprehension. My sister-in-law looked as if she'd been physically struck, her hand flying to her chest. My mother and father simply stared, their minds visibly short-circuiting, trying to force the quiet, overlooked boy they had dismissed for 13 years into the same frame as the prodigy CEO on the giant screen. The tech journalist practically sprinted through the crowd, his phone already in his hand, set to record. "This is incredible. A 13-year-old founder? The buzz around Ether is huge in the tech world. Can I get a comment? An exclusive interview? How did you develop the adaptive AI algorithm?" As the journalist and a growing crowd of intrigued, impressed guests swarmed my son, peppering him with intelligent questions about his work, my family was left standing on the periphery, completely and utterly upstaged at their own meticulously planned, astronomically expensive party. The spectacle they had financed was now just a garish, irrelevant backdrop. The little prince was no longer the center of the universe. The true genius, the one they had ignored and belittled for over a decade, was now holding a spontaneous, impromptu press conference. I walked slowly over to my parents, who were standing like marble statues, their glasses of champagne forgotten in their hands. "All those years," I said, my voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Yet it carried a devastating weight. "You thought you were investing in a dynasty. You were just buying him toys, while you were throwing parties and talking about potential. My son was in his room, actually fulfilling his. You spent a fortune creating a prince to spoil. I raised a king who built his own kingdom, and he didn't need a single thing from you." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need to see the dawning horror, the shame, the regret. I turned my back on them and walked towards my son, who was gracefully explaining the user interface of Ether to a captivated circle of adults. I slipped my arm around his shoulders, feeling the solid, steady strength of the remarkable young man he had become. Against all odds and in spite of them, we left the amusement park that night not as the overlooked poor relations, but as the unannounced, undisputed guests of honor who had accidentally walked onto the wrong movie set. The poetic justice was not in a dramatic confrontation or a shouted accusation. It was in the quiet, undeniable, and magnificent revelation of his worth. Their $100,000 celebration of superficiality had become the perfect, ironic stage for his profound unveiling. They had spent a fortune to illuminate, for everyone to see, the profound and permanent blindness that had defined their hearts. And that payback was more perfect, more poetic than any revenge I could have ever conceived.